diner smelled of frying bacon and hot coffee the morning it all happened. The bell over the door jingled as a group of bikers walked in, leather jackets squeaking as they moved toward the booths. Their heavy boots thudded against the floor, and the chatter of the other customers fell to a hush just for a moment. Then slowly the hum of conversation returned. For most people in the diner, the bikers were a passing curiosity, rough-looking men with long beards and tattoos carrying an energy of intimidation. For her, though, they were simply customers, and she had promised herself long ago that she would treat every customer with the same respect. Her name was Jasmine, and she had been working as a waitress at that diner for nearly 3 years. She carried herself with dignity, even when her feet ached from long shifts or when she had to paste on a smile for rude customers. That morning, she tied her apron a little tighter and balanced her notepad in her hand, walking over to the bikers as if they were no different from anyone else. She smiled softly, voice steady. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I get you started with?" The men looked at her with mixed expressions, some skeptical, some amused. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and sunglasses still on, tilted his head and grinned. "You're the first one who didn't hesitate to walk over here," he said. "Coffee? Black?" Jasmine jotted it down without missing a beat. "Coffee? And you, sir?" She moved her pen down the page the others ordered. And though their voices were rough, almost teasing, she caught something else in their tone. Something like surprise that she wasn't treating them like outcasts. She delivered their coffees with steady hands, then plates of eggs and bacon, making sure each order was right. They thanked her in gruff tones, but she noticed the way their eyes softened just slightly. When the bikers left, one of them tipped her far more than the bill required. She blinked at the folded bills left under the coffee cup, more than she'd make in a day, and for a moment her throat tightened. She tucked the money into her apron and whispered a quiet thank you. But when she returned to the counter, the manager was waiting for her. Mr. Collins was a tall man with thinning hair and a jaw that always looked clenched as if he were chewing on bitterness. He glanced at the bikers walking out the door and then at Jasmine with narrowed eyes. "I told you not to serve them," he said sharply. Her heart sank. "They were just customers," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "They're not the kind of people we want in here," he snapped. His voice carried across the diner, and some customers turned their heads. "And you?" Taking their money, smiling at them. "That's not the image I want for my restaurant." Jasmine's chest tightened. She looked around at the faces, some pitying, some judgmental, others indifferent. She felt the ground slipping beneath her as Mr. Collins added, "You're fired. Clean out your locker." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Fired for doing her job? The disbelief ran through her veins like ice. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped, knowing her words would only fall on ears unwilling to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. Her hands trembled as she untied her apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. She kept her back straight, forcing herself to walk with grace, though every step felt heavy. The bikers were gone. They hadn't heard the exchange. Outside, the autumn air bit against her cheeks, but it wasn't enough to cool the heat of shame and injustice burning inside her. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table in her one-bedroom apartment, staring at the bills stacked in front of her. Rent was due in a week. Her daughter's school needed payment for supplies, and her car had been making a noise she didn't want to think about. She rubbed her temples, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Losing her job meant losing the fragile stability she had been clinging to. She thought of her little girl, Aaliyah, asleep in the next room, clutching the stuffed bear she'd carried since she was 3. Jasmine's chest ached at the thought of failing her daughter. She didn't cry, not yet. She sat in the dim light, her jaw tight, her heart pounding. She replayed the moment over and over, the way the manager's words had cut, the way no one had stood up for her. A waitress, a black woman, dismissed for daring to serve people others were afraid of. The next morning, she woke to the sound of Aaliyah's voice. "Mommy, are you okay?" Her daughter's dark eyes were wide with concern, her small hands resting on Jasmine's arm. Jasmine forced a smile, brushing her fingers gently through her daughter's braids. "I'm okay, baby." "Mommy just has to figure out a new plan." As she packed Aaliyah's lunch and walked her to school, Jasmine felt the weight pressing down heavier. She didn't know where she would work next or how she would make ends meet. She only knew that she had to keep moving. But what she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the very men she had served with dignity and kindness would soon return, and their arrival would change everything. 2 days passed, and the silence of her apartment seemed louder than ever. Jasmine spent the hours filling out applications online, circling ads in the paper, and calling around to ask about openings. But the answers were always the same. "We're not hiring right now. We'll keep your resume on file." Or worse, no answer at all. The rejection pressed against her ribs like a vice. By the evening, she sat slumped on the couch with her head in her hands, wondering how long her savings would last. On the third day, as she walked down Main Street after dropping Aaliyah off at school, she heard the roar of motorcycles in the distance. The sound grew louder until it filled the air and her stomach tightened. She turned her head just in time to see a line of bikes roll down the street, chrome glinting in the sunlight, leather jackets catching the wind. Her breath caught when she recognized some of the faces. It was the same group of bikers she had served at the diner. They slowed as they passed, and for a moment she thought they wouldn't notice her. But then the one with the gray beard, the one who had spoken to her first, lifted his chin in recognition. Their eyes met, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. The bike spooled to a stop and she froze, unsure of what to do. "Hey!" the gray-bearded man called, pulling off his sunglasses. His voice was rough but not unkind. "You're the waitress from the diner?" Jasmine nodded cautiously, her fingers curling around the strap of her purse. "Not anymore," she said softly. The men exchanged glances, their expressions shifting. One of them muttered, "What do you mean?" She hesitated, but something about their steady gazes made her speak. "I was fired for serving you." Her voice cracked on the last word, though she tried to hold it steady. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of their engines. The men looked at each other, anger flashing in their eyes. Finally, the gray-bearded man let out a low whistle and shook his head. "You're telling me they fired you for doing your job? For serving us?" She swallowed hard. That's exactly what happened. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then another biker, tall and broad with tattoos winding down his arms, clenched his fists. "That ain't right. That's not right at all." Jasmine took a step back, nervous at their intensity. But the gray-bearded man softened his voice when he looked back at her. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," she whispered. "Jasmine," he repeated, nodding firmly. "I'm Mason. These here are my brothers." He gestured to the others who gave her respectful nods. "We don't take kindly to people being treated unfairly, and we sure as hell don't like someone losing their job because they showed us basic human decency." Her throat tightened again, but this time not from shame. Something else stirred in her chest. Something like the faintest spark of hope. Mason continued, his voice steady. "Meet us at the diner tomorrow morning. We're going to have a word with your boss." The thought made her heart leap into her throat. I don't want any trouble," she stammered. "Trouble's already here," one of the men said grimly. "We just aim to set it right." That night, Jasmine barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the city outside her window, her mind racing with questions. Would they really show up? Would the confrontation only make things worse? She imagined Mr. Collins' sneer, his cold dismissal, and felt the old humiliation pressing in again. But then she thought of Mason's steady gaze, of the unexpected kindness in the biker's words, and she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Morning came with a chill in the air. Jasmine braided her hair neatly, put on her cleanest blouse, and held her head high as she walked toward the diner. When she turned the corner, her breath caught. The bikers were already there, not just Mason and a handful of men. Dozens of motorcycles lined the street, stretching farther than she could count. Men and women alike leaned against their bikes, arms folded, their presence impossible to ignore. The low murmur of engines idling vibrated through the pavement, and heads were already turning from across the street. Mason spotted her and stepped forward. "Glad you came," he said, his voice carrying both reassurance and resolve. Her hands shook as she glanced toward the diner. Through the window, she could see customers pausing mid-bite, workers frozen in place as they realized what was happening outside. And then, almost on cue, Mr. Collins appeared at the door, his face pale as he took in the sight of the massive crowd. What's the meaning of this?" he barked, his voice thinner than usual. Mason stepped forward, towering over him. "You fired this woman for serving us," he said, his tone calm but sharp as a blade. She did her job with dignity and you punished her for it. That don't sit right with us." The crowd behind him rumbled with agreement. Jasmine's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. Mr. Collins shifted uneasily, trying to keep his composure. "This is my establishment. I have the right to decide who works here." "You've got the right to run your business," Mason said evenly. "But you don't have the right to humiliate a hardworking woman because of the color of her skin, or because she treated people like us with respect." The tension in the air was electric, drawing in passers-by who stopped on the sidewalk, curious, some even pulling out their phones to record. Jasmine's face burned as she realized the whole town might soon see this moment. For the first time, she felt herself standing not in shame, but in strength. Mason glanced at her and nodded as if to say, "This is your moment too." Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice steady as she finally spoke up. "I gave 3 years of my life to this place. I worked double shifts, holidays, mornings, and nights. I treated every customer with the same respect, no matter who they were. And you threw me away like I was nothing." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on louder this time. "Well, I am not nothing, and I won't stand here and be treated like I am." The crowd erupted in applause, the roar of it nearly overwhelming. Mr. Collins's face turned crimson, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. Jasmine stood tall, her heart racing as Mason placed a hand on her shoulder in quiet solidarity. She had no idea what would happen next. But for the first time in days, she felt like she had a voice. The street was alive with murmurs, phones lifted high to capture every second of the confrontation. Jasmine felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. But for once, it wasn't a burden. It was power. She stood straighter than she ever had, her heart hammering, her voice still echoing in her ears. Mr. Collins stammered, his authority crumbling in the face of the crowd. This is harassment," he sputtered. "I run a respectable establishment. I won't have my name dragged through the mud by." His words faltered as Mason stepped closer, his shadow falling over him. "You already dragged your own name through the mud," Mason said, his voice calm but ringing with finality. "You think people won't talk? You think they won't remember the day you fired a hard-working mother for nothing but prejudice? That's the kind of stain you can't scrub off your reputation." Mr. Collins' face drained of color as the crowd erupted again, some booing, others shouting their agreement. Jasmine looked around, stunned by the sheer number of strangers standing with her now. Some were clapping, others chanting her name softly, almost reverently. "Jasmine, Jasmine." The chant grew stronger, a tide of voices she could never have imagined lifting her up. For the first time, she saw fear in Mr. Collins's eyes. Not of Mason, not of the bikers, but of the truth. That his cruelty had been exposed to the light. He sputtered again, pointing at her as though to shift blame. She overstepped. She disobeyed me. I gave her chances." "Don't lie," Jasmine cut in, her voice clear as glass. The crowd quieted at the strength in her tone. "You fired me because I showed kindness, because I treated people like human beings. That's not weakness, that's strength. And no matter what you try to say, the truth will always be stronger than your hate." Her words seemed to slice through the air, cutting away the last of his defenses. Mr. Collins glanced around, saw the phones recording, the eyes locked on him, and his posture sagged under the weight of exposure. With a growl of frustration, he retreated inside, slamming the diner door shut. The crowd erupted into cheers. The roar of motorcycles revved in solidarity, filling the street with thunder. Jasmine pressed her trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the sound. By the sheer force of support she hadn't known existed, Mason leaned toward her, his voice low so only she could hear. "You held your ground." That took courage. Her eyes stung with unshed tears. "I don't feel brave." "I feel shaken." "That's how bravery feels sometimes," he said gently. "It ain't about not being scared. It's about speaking up anyway." The crowd slowly dispersed, but not before several people approached Jasmine. A woman in a business suit handed her a card. "I own a cafe across town," she said warmly. "We could use someone like you, someone strong, someone who treats customers right. Come see me tomorrow." Another man, a teacher at the local high school, told her he'd share her story with his students as a lesson in standing up to injustice. "People need to see what dignity looks like," he said, his voice trembling with respect. Each word, each gesture chipped away at the heaviness inside her. By the time the bikers started to climb back on their motorcycles, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt in years. possibility. Mason lingered, resting one hand on his bike. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "But know this, we got your back always." She nodded, unable to find words, her throat too tight with emotion. All she could manage was a whisper. "Thank you." That evening, when she picked up Aaliyah from school, her daughter ran into her arms. "Mommy!" Aaliyah beamed up at her. "People at school were talking about you. They said you were on the internet." Jasmine blinked in surprise. "What?" Aaliyah giggled, pulling at her hand. "A video? You were talking outside the diner. People were cheering for you. Everyone said my mommy is brave." Jasmine's knees nearly gave way. She pulled her daughter close, pressing her face into the little girl's hair. Brave. The word sounded foreign and familiar all at once, as though it had been waiting in the shadows of her heart for years. That night, after Aaliyah was asleep, Jasmine sat by the window, scrolling through her phone. The video was everywhere on local news pages, on social media, even trending under the tag stand with Jasmine. Comments poured in from strangers across the country, messages of solidarity, offers of help, and words of admiration. Her inbox overflowed with job offers, people telling her they wanted someone like her representing their business. Tears finally came, rolling down her cheeks as she realized what had happened. She had lost her job, but in losing it, she had found her voice. And in finding her voice, she had gained something no paycheck could measure: respect, dignity, and a community that now saw her worth. The next morning, she walked into the cafe whose owner had given her a card. It smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans, the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones. The woman greeted her with a smile and shook her hand firmly. "You're hired," she said simply. "Anyone who stands up like you did is exactly the kind of person I want here." The cafe became more than a job. It became a place where Jasmine could breathe, where she was valued not only for her work, but for her spirit. Customers greeted her by name, many recognizing her from the video, and though the attention was overwhelming at times, she held her head high, reminding herself that her story was no longer one of shame. It was one of pride. Weeks later, on a crisp Saturday morning, Jasmine sat on a park bench watching Aaliyah play on the swings. The sun glowed against her daughter's smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jasmine's heart was light. A rumble of engines grew in the distance, and she turned to see Mason and a few of the bikers riding by. They slowed just enough to wave at her, their faces breaking into grins. She lifted her hand in return, a silent thank you that needed no words. She thought back to the moment she stood on the sidewalk outside the diner, her voice trembling yet strong. The world watching. She had been terrified, uncertain, and fragile. But she had spoken anyway, and that had made all the difference. Life was still hard. Bills still needed paying, and single motherhood was never easy. But now, when Jasmine looked in the mirror, she didn't just see a waitress struggling to get by. She saw a woman who had stood against injustice, who had faced down humiliation and found dignity. She saw a mother her daughter could look up to with pride. As Aaliyah leapt from the swing and ran into her arms, Jasmine held her close and whispered into her hair. "We're going to be okay, baby. Better than okay. We're going to be strong." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Subscribe to EchoSov Black World for powerful stories that inspire and move hearts every day.